What was the story behind Without You? How did you come to do it?
I was at a friend's house one night, and they were playing some albums, and they played one, and I remember liking this tune, and saying, "Geez," but the conversation went on, and about a week or so later, I said, "Oh wait, what was that tune?" So I'm back to the friend's house, and at the time I was talking with Richard Perry about doing Nilsson Schmilsson, and I said, "What song?" I said, "You remember the one I talked about? The John Lennon song, He says, "I don't know, I don't." We didn't play. I said, you did, because we were playing a lot of Beatle records. So make a long story short, I went through every Beatle album and every John Lennon thing I could find. I couldn't find it. And finally I went, it's not them. It's Grapefruit. So I went to the Grapefruit. It wasn't Grapefruit. And I said, where the fuck is this? I mean, where's this song? And finally it hit me. Badfinger. I found the Badfinger album. And I played it for Richard, and I said, I think this could be a big record, because they did rather tiny. Can't live if living is without you, like that. But can't live if living is without, the orchestra and all that stuff and the drums. And Richard agreed immediately, and so we went to London and recorded it. In fact, we recorded it, coincidentally, Badfinger. They were in the same studio down the hall recording their next album. And we found out about that. So we said, shall we bring him in, give him a treat? So we brought, the two of them came in with one of the other guys in the band. We had just finished the mix, cranked it up all the way, and we watched them sit in amazement. It was speechless. I went, what? The ironic part is it became a hit a couple of years later in England. It's still a hit every year in England, a little less each year, but nevertheless it comes out every year and it's a hit. And there was a dry period for Ham and Evans during which Pete Ham hanged himself in his garage, because he went broke. He called the bank one day and they said you're overdrawn. It was total mismanagement, so the rumor goes. Had he held on for another 6 months, he would have had the revenue from the hit again, and it was covered by like another 50 people, and it just, he could have lived and done very well. But it's just tragic again. Well, so many of those stories.
I think that goes without saying that any writer today must be influenced by the Beatles. The four Bs in music now, Bach, Beethoven, Brahms, and the Beatles, and they happen to be the leaders of the pack, and they've been the leaders of the pack for some years because they are in a position where they can speak first and not be criticized, and they can speak first and be accepted and universally heard. So the tendency to go towards what they do, to motivate towards what they do because they're successful is very apparent in most writers today, I think. I think Van Dyke Parks, Randy Newman, Leonard Cohen, and others. Offhand, I don't know. There are a whole bunch of us hiding down, keeping our little offices, writing away at night and making our observations of things. Jim Webb, I think, is a prime example, too. I think he's a tremendous observer. Some of his songs, Paper Cup in particular, I thought was a marvelous song. Up and Away, and things like that. They're not carrying any banners, not throwing any rocks. They're just making little observations of things and telling a neat little story, which people can latch on to. I was hanging around an office, the office of Perry Bodkin Jr., the arranger, and he played this dub one day. It sounded like it was made about 40 years ago, piano voice, scratchy old dub, and this voice, the voice of Randy Newman, as it turned out, was singing Simon Smith and the Amazing Dancing Bear. So I couldn't believe it. I said, who's that? Who's that? And they told me, Randy Newman. They said his uncles were Lionel and Alfred Newman. And I said, geez. I think he's possibly the best, I've said this before, I think he's about the best songwriter in the United States, musically and lyrically. His lyrics are incredible. It would take more time than we have to go into the reasons, but he hits it on the head, and he just has the ability to sort of capture a side of the common man or a side of us all, which we don't talk about in the form of music too often. He seems to talk about it exclusively and nail it every time. Songs about the gas station, etc.
They announced the formation of Apple, and they had the largest press conference since the end of World War II. And during the press conference, someone asked, who's your favorite American artist or group? And he says, Harry Nilsson. He said, Nilsson. And then later on during the conference, they asked Paul who your favorite American group was, and he said Nilsson. So all of a sudden I get a phone call saying, did you hear what the Beatles just said about you? And I said, no. And he says, well, just in New York a few hours ago, they had this conference. He said, I'm the first guy to call you and tell you? And I said, yeah. It was Tony Richland, by the way, who called me. Mr. Richland's favorite song. Anyway, as soon as I hung the phone up, hung off the phone, smashed the receiver, it started to ring. There was all these reporters and people I hadn't heard of asking me, who are you? What's this name? What's your group? And all that stuff. So that's when I realized the value of someone touting you. Brian Epstein wanted to sign me when he heard the Pandemonium Shadow show. And I was taken to poolside at the Beverly Hills Hotel when I was still working at the bank at the time at the computer center.
At the bank shift at night and hitting the music publishing companies during the day, right?
And 2 or 3 days a week I would go without sleep so I could do that. It takes a lot of facility. So anyway, Brian Epstein had a guy working for him named Nat Weiss, who was a famous divorce court attorney type guy. Anyway, we'd meet every day at the Beverly Wilshire by the pool, Beverly Hills rather. They kept offering me money, First it was $25,000, then it was $50,000. Then they played me a Bee Gees tape, a new group they'd just signed. I went, Jesus Christ, they've cornered the market, because it was the Great Mining Disaster of 1941 was the first song they played. Sgt. Pepper had come out. It was like a big, this is it. And I said, no, I don't know if I want to sign. And they said, okay, well, 100,000. I said, no, I don't know. And another couple of days later, another meeting, and it was up to $250,000 to sign. Part of the thing, they wanted to sort of show off a bit, and they said, well, you get to meet a Beatle as part of the contract. I said, oh. I said, at the time, George was on Blue Jay Way writing that song. So we went up to his house, and we met, spent the afternoon together. I said, no, I don't know. And finally, they said, come on. I said, well, you're right. I just met George that day. And I don't know. I said, okay, we have a deal. And the guy says, okay, we'll call you. We're going to meet with Brian, a Beatle of your choice, and and Nat Weiss and this other guy, I forget his name, a lawyer, at the Montrose 67, Expo 67. And I was ready for it, and we were supposed to meet, I think, 5 weeks from that day. And about 2 weeks later, I got a phone call from Nat Weiss saying, you'll hear about it in a few hours anyway, but Brian just killed himself. So I went, Jesus Christ, talk about the wind shifting, which turned out to be a good thing for me, in a sense, in that I didn't sign with NIMS.
I just don't quite feel comfortable enough, to step out in front of a lot of people and show my wares. It's sort of maybe it's just, insecurity. Maybe they won't like me, but it's a difficult thing to do. Performers have a rough road. I don't know if I'd like to do that.
You've done it before, though, haven't you?
Yeah, a few times I've done it, and I enjoyed it. It has its rewards, no question of that. But I think it opens up a whole new avenue of values for some reason, social values for some reason, with public acceptance. Longevity and degree of difficulty. Say those three ingredients would be the necessary ingredients to determine the greatness of a man's career, or the outcome of his career, the impact it has. So keeping that in mind, I imagine it's necessary to have public acceptance, in some way, shape, or form. That's 1/3 of it, maybe. Beethoven had public acceptance. It came later. Certainly had the degree of difficulty as judged by its peers. And it's lasting a long time. Therefore, we now look at Beethoven's work and say it's great. Collectively. And I think the public acceptance part of it is a necessary thing, but I think it has its upside potential and downside risk. And I think the risk factor is merely exposing yourself to your peers, and then accepting what comes from that. And sometimes I think that comes in the form of reshaping your personality, because I think people living in a public way have to have certain personality similarities. They're more defensive, possibly more conscious and perceptive of what's going on around them than people who are not in the public's eye, because they're so conscious of being looked at that they're conscious of themselves and others around them, more than the average person is, I think. And that results, I think, in a personality change, which could be good, could be bad, I don't know. But most performers, until they get through that barrier, when they've passed the age barrier, get up there a little bit, they seem, well, even then, some of them are crazy, Most performers, their personalities don't impress me, And I'm afraid that if I started doing public appearances, I'm strong enough to resist the temptations of being a celebrity, and therefore I'll fall into the personality trap and be doomed to an everlasting life. I'm working on a project for ABC. It's an animated story idea I had, And Fred Wolf is animating it. He won an Academy Award in '67 for The Box. You saw it, 1967. And it's a musical, comedy, science fiction, horror story about a boy and his dog and his point.
It's about a place where everything and everyone has a point, a physical point. The buildings have points, and the barns, and the houses and carts, and the people have points on the tops of their heads. And one day in this community is born a pointless child without a point on his head. And as he grows up, he's subject to ridicule in the village, from the schoolmates. Ultimately, he
is banished for being in violation of the law, which is the law of the land, which requires everyone to have a point. All things in the land must have a point. And since he didn't have a point, he's banished to the pointless forest, where all things are pointless and nothing's pointed. And he goes through the pointless forest and has a series of misadventures wherein he meets the rock man and the leaf man and the three fat sisters, and he acquires a philosophical point of view, and armed with that new ammunition, he goes back to confront the villagers, and he's met at the town gate by the evil count, who was aide-de-camp to the king. The count was responsible for the boy's banishment, and he confronts them with his newfound knowledge and says, I found out that everything in the pointless forest had up with the leaves pointed, the trees pointed, and everything in the pointless forest, in fact, had a point. And I figured that if everything in the pointless forest has a point, and everything here has a point, that means that everything has a point. And if everything has a point, then I must have one too. And someone says, "You got a point there." That's when, at that point, the bell in the pointed steeple begins to toll, and the points in all the buildings begin to melt, and the points in the people's heads begin to melt, and our protagonist, little Oblio, grows a point on top of his head. And it's told through the eyes of a father and son at bedtime, sort of story. Oh, you mean about the Paul McCartney comments? I don't, it's funny. I haven't heard the comment yet. Oh, I heard someone told me McCartney left the Beatles. I don't know. I think if we ever need them again, they'll ride down out of the hills, and yes,
John and Yoko.
Jesus, I'm such a tremendous, I'm a loyalist, when it comes to Lennon and McCartney. They can do very little wrong. John Lennon's songs, I think, get better and better, and I think it's a rare, unique opportunity we have now to see someone as prolific and as good as Lennon is, at work, because he's in his prime now. Whatever he's doing, he's right from inside, directly straight out, and very few people ever get to that point when they can do that, and he's doing it. I'm just glad he's doing it. And same with McCartney. I think McCartney may write different songs and may politically differ with John. I don't know. That's what I was told from someone reading the interview or the commentary he made. But he, musically and lyrically, is equally as talented and as great as Lennon, Where regardless of what they do, they're still, they're okay in my book, and you can quote me. They're the greatest.
We had an apartment, a flat as we say, in London for 6 years. And Mama Cass died in my bed, and so did Keith Moon. Yeah. And there were a lot of other incidents which took place. I used to just loan it out to all my rock and roll pals. But every time we'd go back, it was all messed up, and we had to spend 2 months getting it fixed up, and then we'd live in for the other 3 months. It was time to go. And during that period, I was staying with Ringo at the Beverly Wilshire, and John was also staying there, and Hillary, the guy who works with Ringo. Well, a bunch of adjoining rooms, and all of a sudden one day Hillary came in and said, he just got a phone call from Lennon saying, Cash has died in your bed and the police are there looking for drugs. And I went, what? Because she didn't even take drugs, We found out later on, of course, that she was 3/4 of her heart had turned to fat, And the funny thing was I'd seen her just about a month or so before, and she looked great. She was just coming out of a beauty shop. She'd lost about 40 pounds. She looked great. She was in great spirits. She was rehearsing for a nightclub act, and she was really in top form, and boom, And then after that, there was this jerk she was with who stayed on and lived in the apartment without us even knowing it for like 3 or 4 months, until we went back to London. And it's so strange. You walk and you find things which belong to someone else, they're not there. Same with Keith. We found some stuff, Keith that was another one. I just got that phone call. I went, oh, shit. Keith and I were dear friends, real close. And Keith and Ringo and I were sort of the Three Musketeers, just to hang out all the time,
What did Keith die of?
Drugs. The thing about Keith was, he was the only guy, like when he used to stay in the flat, he was the only guy who really took care of it, oddly enough, maybe he made some messes, but he made sure they were cleaned up before he split. So finally when I decided not to let anyone use it anymore, I thought, well, I'll lease the flat out. So 1 year I leased it to an Arab. It was a really neat flat. It was just, in fact, one of the guys who worked for Ringo, a designer, designed it all. It was all chrome and glass and real, right in the center of Mayfair. One balcony you could read the time from Big Ben, and the other balcony you could see the bunnies going up to Playboy Club. So finally when the Arab finished, Keith said he was looking for an in-town flat. So I said, well, take mine. He said, okay, but only on a business level. I said, you bet, because I'm not loaning it out anymore, So he leased it from me, And then in the end, he started having parties, and I get complaints, and they wanted to evict him. And I spoke to him like the day before he died, and it was one of the only times I've had, it wasn't a harsh word with Keith, but it was I said, Keith, you're putting the pressure on me. I'm going to lose a lot of bread if they evict you. They have some kind of an option in their clause which they can cancel it unless something happens. And he says, well, they're going to have to get me out of here with a bulldozer. I said, well, that's not friendly, you know. I mean, he says, well, business is business. I said, okay, what about business? Then you're going to cost me a lot of money, you know. And he was drunk at the time. 2 days before, he had said, I'm leaving because they're causing a lot of trouble and I don't want you to lose the bread. But the last time we spoke, it was like not a happy, still think about that once in a while. It's like, too bad. The other night I was talking to Eric Idle at a party they're having for his new book about Brian of Nazareth. He said last time he saw Keith, he gave him a big hug. That was a nicer way to say goodbye.
A lot of contemporary events don't interest me as much as they should, I guess. I find myself less concerned about the Chicago 7 conspiracy than I possibly should be. I don't know. But to me, it seems as though it's going to happen again, probably, and it isn't the first time. As a news item, it doesn't raise too many questions for me because I think the question has been asked before as to how much power should be exerted in the courtroom on defendants and how much rights the defendants have. And I'm a little more interested, I think, in possibly the system. As a matter of fact, I had an idea recently for a story concerning a national interest crime being committed or a national interest trial and the use of television and the use of a peripheral computer attachment to the television set, which would enable viewers to vote, you know. Remember, that's in the works. You know, they've been predicting it for years, and now they have working models of television screens with little typewriter attachments, which will be hooked up to neighborhood computer banks, you know, which will have at their disposal all the information from all the encyclopedias, let's say, and also communications hook up with them local markets so you can order your food from the little typewriter, you know. And also, I'm sure in time that we'll get to vote on certain referendum issues or for the presidency over our little home communication lines, you know. So when I first met John, 67 or 8, it was the day that Cynthia, his former wife, left the house and Yoko moved in. And John and I spent the whole night, literally, you know, from like in the afternoon all through the evening, all night till the dawn, talking about divorce and separation. So in fact, we became very close that night talking about it. We became very intimate, you know. All night long, Yoko, she slept on the floor by his feet, on the couch and all, and we just kept talking. Finally, we crashed, and I had to go into town early in the morning. Here's a film crew coming out. They were going to film something called Smile. It was a real fast motion camera, so that you film something and it comes out very slowly, you know. And so the camera crew was going to be there in an hour or so he had to clean up, and I had to get back into London. And as I was leaving, he was been making some tea for us, you know. That's typical of him. That's sort of the thing that he did. He'd get up in the morning, he'd be up there shining his shoes or something, doing something positive. He was always doing things like that, you know. And he was out there making tea. You want a little tea? I'll be mum, you know, and I did all that stuff. You know. How do you like sugar? You know, it's just stuff, you know. And that's when he gave me the walrus jacket, because we'd exhausted ourselves with conversation, and we were both blurry-eyed and everything. And it was about 7 in the morning, and there's nothing really to say, so he's cooking the tea, and I'm just standing around in the kitchen. And there was this, you know, the Indian jacket, which when it's turned inside out became the walrus jacket, you know. I said, oh, nice jacket, you know. I told him, he says, oh, you like it? Here, have it. I said, no, I don't. He said, no, I said, yeah, I want you to have it. I said, no, it wouldn't fit. And he said, no, try it on. Looks good on you. Yeah, you look good in Indian gear, you know. He put it on, the sleeves was like, you know, about 6 inches too short, you know. But then I sort of tucked my arm and said, that doesn't look too bad, does it? Took it back to Los Angeles with me, gave it to my sister, and she almost fainted, you know. We always kept just a good relationship, and we were friends, and we had a lot of fun. He was a man of his word, and he was a goer, a doer. He did things, and he always said, come on, let's go, let's do this. Yeah. And he was an upper, like in the studio. He was always, yeah. It was up, you know. And I just dug that in him because everybody else at the time was like, yeah, down. And he was up, and he was primarily just a guy who was just fascinated by life. He loved life, and he loved show business too. I dug that bit, and of course at the time I was afraid of show, but still am. But I mean, he loved it. He really enjoyed being John Lennon. You know, he enjoyed being a Beatle. That was fun. He got off on that, and I admired his tenacity and his qualities, like shining his shoes in the morning and making the tea and things like that, and always having a ready, quick, witty remark. You know, like, people just aren't that funny, that quick, that often. You know, and he had that, and I love that. I love his humor, his style, his sense of style was incredible. He could become John Lennon at will, or just be somebody, you know, walking down the street. He could walk down the street and not be noticed. I mean, somebody would spot him, but I mean, or if he just wanted to be noticed, he could walk into the most crowded, noisy joint in the world. If he wanted to be noticed, all he had to do is like put on his little round glasses and doff his cap and put his hands a certain way on his hips and walk in chewing gum, every place you'd feel him. And you just go, oh, there's John Lennon, immediately. And you knew when to turn that on and when to turn it off, you know? And he was a real honest cat with a great deep sense of humor and a sense of the human condition, if you know what I mean. He was always constantly aware of the irony and the ultimate jokes and the paradoxes in life. And that's a part that everybody, I think, likes to think he or she has in him or her. And he had it, and it was visible, and that's why fans and people grab at you and do things. I guess they think it's okay to play with yourself, and they see part of them in you. So what they're doing is they're playing with themselves. So they're allowed to touch themselves, which means you. You know, I'm not. This has nothing to do with the Mark David Chapman. That's over the fringe, you know. But generally speaking, that's my impression of it. You know. In Chapman's case, according to the psychiatrist, he had to get rid of John Lennon because he was taking over his identity. So he can't be two of them, so he had to get rid of him. You know. But life goes on, brah. I'll give it a chance. How about you? The studio itself, well, they're just about 3 or 4 years behind most other studios, which are competitive, you know. Slight example of the use of Dolbys, which is a tape hiss eliminator, which are built in the boards in England, you know. They don't even have them available at RCA. You have to order them from New York, you know, just the little optional things which some studios have and others don't. The EQing is different. The equipment is helter-skelter, you know.